Now, dear friends, welcome to this little chat in the lounge. I hope you will feel like home with me, and never mind that there's 1,000 people watching. I would like to start with you, Connie. We've heard an amazing speech now, and your message that we need to act now. I mean, you could have been a green activist, but you are actually a decision maker, and that makes me slightly optimistic. However, you are picturing a rather dire situation. Next week you're going to Durban to try to get a little bit closer to this global treaty that we're all waiting for. Can you give us some indications that we should be optimists on behalf
Durban?
For Durban? Yes.
No.
Not at all.
No. No, you know, some of us really worked hard to try to see if you could not sort of push things forward up to the Copenhagen conference in 2009. And when it came to it, yes, a lot of countries, now more than 90 countries worldwide, have actually set their domestic targets. But as you know, also some of the big ones, they do not want, so far they have not been wanting to sort of make it global, and at least not in any binding form. And that is still where we are. I mean, no miracles will happen in the American Congress within the next 8 days, I guess. And as long as the Americans are not moving, the old truth is the same. It's too easy for China to hide behind the back of the United States, and of course they say, after you. That is, of course, sort of a bit depressing or pessimistic, but then the positive thing is that positions are also moving. And today you can actually discuss when would China, emerging economies, and the US take on some more binding commitments. As late as last week in Washington, that was at a closed meeting. There was a really constructive debate about that. So it's not that some of us are living in a fancy dream world. I mean, we are actually moving in the direction, but too slowly.
But Tony here, he told us that the COP process is a matrix. It's a parallel world with its own kind of language and its own kind of success criteria. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, but I mean,
are you outside the real world?
You can't find anybody that's stronger than me can see how irritatingly slow and frustrating this process is. I mean, tell me all about it. It is really irritating. And I could say a lot of bad things about it. There is only one problem. As easy as it is to see the weaknesses with this process, as difficult it is to point to another international forum where the parties will accept to discuss it, not to talk about where they could actually chop over some of the Gordic knobs that we would need to address, whether it's in G20 or wherever it is. But so far there has been no appetite for that. So this is the forum we have. What I then say is we should not sit, all of us, waiting for that to result in anything. We must do things nationally, locally, regionally at the European level, and then at the same time try to push the rest of the world to do what is needed.
Tony, outside of this matrix, in the real world, could we establish some new channels for the forerunners to talk together and try to sort of get some momentum while we're waiting for the global treaty success?
Well, let me say first of all that I agree completely with what Connie just said and her characterization of it. And as I was careful to say in my speech, there is no substitute for the United Nations. As a mediator, as continuing discussion, we must put all effort we can in trying to reach agreement in that forum, recognizing that it can have knock-on effects because countries can meet there. We know the basic group, well, you were very centrally involved in all that. You know, there can various readings of that, but the basic group did emerge from that. Excuse me. So we must keep going with that. But yeah, my feeling is we must look for other initiatives. I just feel climate change is a really, really dangerous topic, and I don't like to see it become normalized. I don't like it being seen as just another issue. I think that is wrong because, you know, I spend a lot of I'm not a scientist, but I spend a lot of time studying scientific literature as far as I can, and, you know, the dangers, no other civilization has had to confront anything like it, in my opinion. So there is this enormous gap. So we have to look for innovation of all kinds, I feel. And if that could include some of the leading countries getting together, so be it. But as Connie said, the European Union already provides a certain forum for that. As I mentioned, the German experiment at least will be interesting, but I think a bit more lateral thinking, really, to see how we might produce some greater breakthroughs politically, socially, economically, technologically, is where we're at. And so I don't think more of the same is going to do it.
Yeah. Now, Connie, although the European Union is doing quite well, I mean, astonishingly, it's probably the most important thing happening on the climate, what you're doing with the 2020 package. But still, as you said, you're only 11% of the emissions. Now, do you think that what you're doing with renewable energy investments, with energy efficiency technology, do you think that is more important now or more substantial than the negotiations?
No, I would not say that it's sort of either or, because my message is we have to do it for many, many reasons. And I think what dawns on still more people is that if we do this intelligently, it can also be a driver for the innovation that we need in our industries. And I mean, even the worst climate skepticists, even those who say there is no such a thing as climate change going on, they would normally agree that to become more energy efficient and more resource efficient in a world with 9 billion people at the middle of this century, would that not in any case be a good idea? And if we subscribe to that might be a very, very good idea, then we also know that demands after sustainable products will increase. So what I also see is a race on this. Who will get the biggest share? Who will have the front-runner positions for the cars, for the systems, for the technologies, for the products that the world will need? And that is where I see this as one of the things Europe could focus on in order to exit the crisis.
Can I just... I mean, I think we must have I'm afraid, a greater confrontation with the fossil fuel industries. And I think, for example, we should have a moratorium on building any coal-fired power station, in principle across the world, very unlikely, but in Europe if possible. And I think the sheer consolidated power of the fossil fuel industries is something we have to wrestle with. And I don't think that's easy, and I don't think it necessarily operate within the parameters of accepted politics, because in the case of a power station being built in the UK, it was popular protest around the power station that stopped it being built. So, I think activism will have a role in all of this as well. And I think we have to get ourselves out of this kind of easy world where we make confident statements about we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and recognize we're confronting, if we're interested in truly producing a difference in the world in the face of what to me are enormous threats, we have to confront this monolith, which Connie said is very well discussed in a certain sense in the latest IEA report, which has tremendous inertia because of the long-term investment that's needed in the fossil fuel industries. I know Stadler is one of the sponsors of this conference, but I'm not, well, I mean, it's not the fault of the fossil fuel companies, because all of us, I mean, everyone's looking at their bloody mobile phone while you're speaking. All around us, the whole world is now driven by energy. So, but to me, somehow we have to look laterally at these things, not just constantly say we need more renewable technologies. We have to look at the power structures that exist, and we have to see how we can get new edge, even if it may be very difficult politically within a country to do that. But this is the impasse we're in, and I can't stress too strongly, you have to disassemble it from a matrix-type world. We have to live in the real world where these changes are actually happening, which are truly, truly threatening to our civilization, and where we have simply not got a grip on them. We're nowhere close to getting a grip on them.
Anna, what's the conservative approach to revolution? I mean, we need an energy revolution. It's inevitable that we need an energy revolution. And what does it look like from your approach? I mean, it has been argued that governments shouldn't pick winners because we will fail doing that. Now, how do you deal with this? Do you want to try to pick winners?
Well, I think the conservative way to revolution is guided market economy. When I say guided market economy, it's about, for example, using the EU power as a regulator when it comes to standardization, as on getting the best practices done. You will through that type of regulation make the market economy function. The products will come. It will be less energy use, and even if it's only 11% of the energy market and or the CO2 emissions coming from EU, in the global economy, the force of a big consumer market like the European is quite big. And what we have seen as in other areas is that when the EU makes new types of standardization, it becomes a world standard in a way, because very few producers would like to produce different standards for 4 or 5 different markets. So it becomes world leading. And I think that's one of the things that we have to do.
Heidi, your party was no stranger to revolutions in the early days, but now you find yourself in the middle of a government, but your government recently published a white paper on petroleum activity, which assumes in its analysis of the future gas markets, it assumes that the European Union will actually fail on reaching its long-term climate goals, and you assume that the 3.5 degree scenario from the IEA will be the result, and we're investing 10 to 20 billion euros every year in petroleum.
I think
Giddens mentioned the power of the fossil fuels. How does it?
Giddens are of course right when he talks about the power the fossil fuel industries have, as in Norway, as in any other country that has a big fossil production. But I think you read the white paper not very correctly. What is written in the paper is based on the EA forecasts and reflection over them. And it's also stating very clearly that the national goals for the climate and the international goals for the climate, as well as for the EU, they are we are building the politics on that. And I think when we are hearing the commissioner here, there's reason to be somewhat optimistic, even though Durban is coming up with a lot of challenges. I think what you have said about the second Kyoto period is viable for Norway as well. We are prepared to take another round with the Kyoto agreement, but we are very happy that the European Union is on board. But we need a balanced outcome of the total of Durban to do that. But if not, the European Union had been in the same position, the Kyoto Protocol could change name to the Oslo Protocol, and that will be for no good.
Well, in Norway, we have vast government reports about the potential for turning Norway into a low-carbon economy. I mean, we have 10 kilograms of reports telling how to do it. But they also tell that...
You think that's a problem? I think that's an opportunity.
No, exactly. But the problem is that the reports also tells us that it's more expensive to create a low-carbon economy in Norway than it is to buy cheap offsets abroad. Now, this is the biggest debate in the Norwegian climate, and I know that's what you're struggling with right now, Heidi. Giddens, what's your view on this debate? Our Prime Minister, he's an economist, a traditional economist. He argues very strongly that it's a waste of resources to reduce emissions in Norway if there are cheaper reductions to be bought somewhere else. What's your viewpoint on that?
Well, I don't want to intrude too directly in Norwegian politics.
Oh yes, come on.
As a matter of principle, though, I'm not especially in favour of carbon offsets. Therefore, because I think they can too easily be a cop-out, really. And we don't know what the consequences of them are, whether they actually work. A lot of studies show they don't actually work very well, nor does a clean development mechanism work very well, because you might fund, a renewable factory in, let's say, a particular country. People make money out of that factory, and then they go and buy big cars and drive around. So, those things are quite compromised. So, in principle, you must drive for emissions cuts which are directly made within a country, or within the European Union, or within a region. So, I'm in principle not in favour of that argument, but I don't know enough about the context of Norwegian politics to comment directly on. In spite of your provocative attitude.
you argue that solutions to the climate crisis...
We've got the key leaders in Norwegian politics. Yeah. Anyway, that's my opinion as a matter of principle. That, use them only in a limited way, and I think the EU is also relying too much on them, if I might say so. I don't think that that they're truly authentic way of reducing carbon emissions, or I'm not satisfied they are.
Erna, in your speech earlier today, you stated very clearly that you are still standing behind the climate treaty in the Parliament, the Norwegian treaty, and you are going to fulfill the targets in 2020 with domestic action. And actually, most politicians, most parties have said that recently, that they will. But on the other hand, you said we should leave industry, we should leave the ETS sector to the ETS. Well, we know that that won't make it happen. We're not going we cannot reach the 2020 targets in the transport sector alone.
No.
How can we deal with that?
But I think, well, the challenging thing is to make sure that the carbon price increases in the European ETS market, not in one single country, because you do not change the emissions by changing the workplaces or moving companies out of the country. But one thing you can change with that type of policies, where you blindly say we are just concerned about the Norwegian emissions and not about the overall fact, is that you will decrease the public support for the policies. People have to see that it can function. And that's why we also say that we use the ETS for that part. Well, we would like to have systems that inside the EU would increase the carbon costs inside the ETS system. I have my reason for being more skeptical to the other mechanisms, especially towards development countries, is that they are not part of a closed system of trading. If there was a closed system of trading, that we could make sure that you are not just investing in a project and then you get another emission in other place, I don't think we really have the security mechanisms around that. I'm more skeptical on that part than I'm on the ETS system.
But Connie, obviously the ETS is an extremely important tool, being the overall emission ceiling. However, if we just look for the cheapest measures, aren't we missing the kind of revolutionizing stuff that we obviously need?
Let me make it perfectly clear. ETS is very important, and it's also very important, as Erna says, to get the price up. And the Commission is trying to sort of keep that debate alive for the time being, because it's extremely important that we take the right decisions there. But it's of course not the only tool. I would like to say a few things in defense of offsetting, because I believe that we should not underestimate the value for a number of developing countries. When there have been good clean development mechanisms projects, I would anytime defend that as a cost-efficient way of getting things done. The problem is, as Giddens was referring to, if it takes over too much of the effort, so that we send money abroad, but we do not do all the things we could do back home, but also things that would serve our economy well to do, to become more energy efficient, to have the innovation and things like that, then it is not good enough seen from a European point of view. So that is actually why in the European Union we are changing the policies from 1st of January 2013. It's already the law. So it's already decided that if there is not a big new international deal done now, before 1st of January 2013, then after that date, European countries cannot make new clean development mechanisms projects in the emerging economies, but only in the least developed and most vulnerable countries. And there it still makes sense. If you are in Mali and you have an old oil mill and you would really like to replace it by something that would be better for your economy, then if we could come and help with new renewable technology or biomass or whatever, that would be good for us, but it would definitely also very much make a technology jump in a developing country that needs it. So there are good things to say, but if it takes up so that it's more or less half of what we do, then it's not the most economic way in the long run. Final point, because one thing is, if we talk 2020, then we can look at what is cheap, what is cheapest. But if we say that we have to make this transformation long term, then of course it's stupid to send the money outside Europe instead of investing them in the transformation in Europe. And that's why in Europe we are changing the priorities now.
So doing things domestically and internationally must be balanced in a reasonable way.
Yes, but I think relatively more should be done in Europe, for instance, in energy efficiency, and that is why the Commission is saying, yes, we can have this discussion, 20%, 30%, and how can we move that discussion? Now we have said, if only Europe was serious about its own energy efficiency targets, where we are not on track to meet the 20%, we're only on track to meet 9%. If only we did that, that would automatically lead to a 25% CO2 emissions reduction by 2020, and that would benefit our economy.
Heidi, Connie said that we need re-industrialization rather than de-industrialization. Now, if Europe keeps on walking alone, putting a cost on carbon, should we let Europe lose its carbon-intensive industry, or should we maintain our production and try to sort of protect it from carbon leakage from the rest of the world who doesn't have a cost on carbon?
I think the discussion about carbon leakage will be very important, but I don't think we should overestimate it either. I think it's important to have a realistic discussion about it, because we are under the same ETS, our industry, and this will be a leakage from outside Europe. And I think it's good to have a common approach with the rest of Europe on that issue. But having said that, I also like to say something about the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism. I was in Kyoto in 1997, and I know that there would have been no Kyoto agreement without a Clean Development Mechanism. Is fundamental and basic, and I think it's wise of us to use it in the best way. But I also agree that the strategy forward has to be to do as much as possible internationally, and as much as possibly on a European level, and as much as possible on the national level. We can't choose one from the other. And I think the key question for Norway is, how do we deal with the fact that almost everything we can do to lower emissions from Norway will have a higher cost than doing it abroad? That's the very rich country's problem. And I think nobody would accept that idea that, no, we are not going to do anything in Norway because we are that rich. That won't be an explanation that is viable anywhere.
Tony, before we finalize this discussion, just to sort of maintain some kind of optimism here, we have been kind of pessimistic now.
We've got to finish soon.
Are you able to see some potential game changers emerging? For instance, Bloomberg recently announced that wind power will be competitive all over the world by 2016 with fossil fuels. Can that change the world completely when that happens? How fast can things change when the market starts pulling itself without help from politicians?
Well, I mean, are we able to go on for 3 or 4 minutes longer than your schedule? Because, well, I'd like to comment on things that were said, because I don't wholly agree with them. I mean, on the ETS, you know, the carbon markets were invented by a group of American economists, and they insisted that carbon must be auctioned, and it must be auctioned completely. That is the only way in which you get a systematic price on carbon. That did not happen in the ETS. As a consequence, the ETS has not made much impact thus far on carbon emissions. Most studies of the ETS suggest it may have reduced carbon emissions by something like 4 or 5%, but then, as against that, some countries probably exaggerated their carbon emissions. So its impact has not been great, and we have to see what, as it were, the third phase of the system actually delivers. To me, carbon markets themselves are still a bit of a fantasy world, and we have to see whether they can deliver the goods. Secondly, energy efficiency. You've got to be quite careful with energy efficiency because of this famous thing in economics called Giddens' paradox. The more efficient energy systems become, the more energy is used historically. And the reason for this is that if you save money on energy, people spend money on other goods, and those goods consume energy. We know that this effect is not complete, that is, energy efficiency savings can reduce emissions, but the effect on emissions can be relatively limited depending on how far you control what people do with the savings they make. That's why I would insist on the point I made in my speech that you must have a holistic model of a green economy. It's no good simply imagining that because you get a 20% increase in energy efficiency, which incidentally the EU is still quite a long way away from at the moment, that this will reduce to a 20% composite reduction in emissions, because it's very unlikely it will do so. There is a variable amount, and how you define the policy can depend a lot on what people do with the savings they make or the other money that is injected back into the economy. Finally, the remark about clean development mechanism. I'm not going to deny it can do some good. I'm simply saying that there is no necessarily equality between expenditure on renewable energy schemes and reducing carbon emissions, which is, after all, the main thing we have to do if we're going to save our civilization. See, there is not a complete relationship there. See, even though it may do good, it doesn't necessarily reduce carbon emissions. I mean, it may do, but may not do, because it depends what happens with the money that is thereby generated. This is what it's like to live in the real world as opposed to the sort of world of plans. As regard, well, I mean, it is a kind of funny situation, but I feel really, really nervous about climate change. I think it's an awesome thing to suppose that, we might have altered the world's climate and we can't go back on it, and that it will mean more and more violent weather. I suppose I worry about it a lot more than most people talk about it do, and I hope those worries are misplaced. But if those worries are real, as you were saying in your concluding comment, we have to look, I think, for some breakthroughs. Where could we find them? Well, I think, we look for them in trying to encourage innovation on these different levels. Still go on innovating on the level of political negotiation, see where we can get to, see if we can stimulate consciousness, because my great fear is that we'll wait until it's too late, that we'll wait until there are terrible events happening in the world, and by definition, in the case of climate change, it will be too late unless somebody discovers a way of getting emissions out of the atmosphere. Therefore, I think we should invest in people who are looking at some aspects of geoengineering. I think that's really important. I mean, many environmentalists for a long while were against that because it tends to inhibit other action on the part of citizens, but I'm in favor of it. The trouble with innovation is that it's usually lateral, as I said. I think I said in my speech. It comes from the side field, and that's what's hard to encourage. If you think of the internet, I met the 4 guys who invented the internet. I was on a panel with them. None of them knew what they were creating. That something might come out of the side field which will completely transform, our relationship to energy systems, but there's no way of guaranteeing that.
Well, just to finalize, Connie, what do you think will come first? A global treaty that gives us an energy revolution, or an energy revolution that gives us a global treaty and a emission ceiling?
No, but I think that it goes like this. It's not sort of first you have one big system there and then everybody waits until it's there, or suddenly the revolution comes. I mean, this holistic approach, we can all agree to that it will transform all sectors, the way we sort of think of society. But it's just, how does such a holistic transformation come through? It comes through a lot of different tools. Pricing, whether it's ETS or something else, but it's pricing. It is savings, clever energy, smart solutions, R&D, standards. It's a lot of things that we need to do to have all the tools there. And it's not so that we can make this transformation only through 1 or 2 tools. We need all of them. And then you said in your question before, EU keeps walking alone on the ETS. It's actually not true. Within the last, 12, 18 months, Australia and Korea have now announced they're going. California, you're seeing the former governor soon. They have now announced last month, the 8th largest economy in the world, they are moving on with this. Most interestingly, maybe, China is doing it. Next year, a pilot project in 6 provinces for 250 million people. I know in Norway, as in Denmark, it's a relatively big pilot project. They will make a pilot project on setting a price on carbon and building markets, and the EU Commission is helping the Chinese how exactly to construct it. If I had said this only 2 or 3 years back, you would have said, China making carbon trade using markets to achieve their targets, you're dreaming. So things are moving, and that should be my last point. Yes, there are many challenges here, but look in your own company. Where were you on this 3 or 5 years back? Things are not moving fast enough, but at least we are moving. We should just try to speed up to scale.
Finally, I got some reason to be slightly optimistic.
Only slightly.
Yes.
Yeah.
We could discuss this forever, but we will have to move on to the program. Thank you to our distinguished panel. Thank you all. And I am sure we will continue these discussions throughout the conference. Thank you.